That's why it's preparing.
Good morning, Anne. Sorry, I didn't see you.
I'm already there. I'm all ready to go.
Okay. Right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Overview Committee. I've lost count as to how many virtual meetings we've now had, but I look forward to the day when we can meet in person again, which hopefully may not be too long. So happy New Year to everybody, because it's the first time we've met since the new year. And we will start by asking Elaine, please, to take the record of attendance.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not muted, am I?
No.
No.
Sorry, I've opened a Word document. Right, I'm just going to do a roll call for the benefit of the recording. If you can just indicate whether you're present, please. Councillor Trevor Burnham.
Present.
Councillor Sarah Devereux.
Present.
Councillor Dick Edgington is an apology. Councillor Alex Hall is an apology. Councillor Sandra Harrison.
Present.
Councillor Jill Makinson Sanders.
Yes, present.
Councillor Fiona Martin.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Helen Matthews.
Present.
Councillor Edward Mossop.
Present.
Councillor Claire Newman.
Present.
Councillor Sarah Parkin.
Present. Chair, can I just say that again, I'm in that same position of having the children here all homeschooling and in lessons, so if I do switch the video, it's because we're having problems with the Wi-Fi again. I'll still be here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I've got Councillor Dan McNally who's substituting for Councillor Alex Hall today.
Present.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call.
Thank you. Councillor McNally, you're very welcome. You're stepping into Councillor Ashton's shoes. He used to be super sub because he used to join us at just about every meeting. And I think you're now doing the same, because I think this is about the third in a row that you've been to. So nearly a permanent member. You're very welcome.
Sin, is it?
Thank you. Item 2 then is disclosure of interest, if any. Does anybody have anything they need to declare?
Yes, please. My two of my family work for PS2, which is update on 7A, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? No, if not, then item 3 is the minutes. Can I sign these as a true record, please? Councillor Makinson Saunders.
Yes, I propose that.
Thank you. Seconded. All in favour? Anybody against? No, thank you very much. Item 4 then is actions on page 23. Anybody got anything on page 23?
Yes, me. I haven't actually sorted out those recommendations simply because I did feel that the officer was really burdened down with doing the PS2 stuff, and I was going to speak to her this week anyway. I didn't know it was items 2 and 8, but I will look at them this week. I hadn't forgotten about it. It was just I felt that she had an awful lot to get through, and I didn't want to burden her with having to go through a load of notes. So I will follow that up this week though. So I apologise.
47A1, is that your?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Anybody else got anything on page 23? Page 24, right down at the bottom of page 24. I've just this morning had an update from John Medler to say that the number of, which is, say, right down at the bottom, 50A, the number of consultants undertaking work for the council this financial year up to the period of the 30th of December 2020 is 15, with a total spend of 569,400 £1,259. That's literally just come in this morning. So we'll email that out to everybody, Elaine, can we
Yeah.
please? So
Fiona,
if you
could
wish,
we?
yeah,
Sorry. Could we
Go on.
learn how that differs from other years? Is that because of the alliance? What is the reason that seems to? We haven't been spending that sort of money for a very long time, and it does seem £500,000 on consultants is quite a big chunk of Councillor Fry's budget, isn't it?
well, we can ask the question
Yeah.
and get the. So, what do you want? A comparison with the last 5 years, or
Yeah,
just
that'd be
to ask the
interesting. And an
question why?
explanation. Yeah, sorry, and an explanation why it's as high as it is what's the cause behind it? What's leading up to us spending that much money? Just
Okay.
be an interesting exercise to understand, wouldn't it?
Can I just comment on that, Councillor
Yeah.
Martin?
Yeah.
Apologies, I can't have my picture on today. I'm not ignoring everybody. We'll do a little bit more work on getting you some detail on that, because I know some of that activity will be, for example, in relation to the Towns Fund, where it's externally funded. So we'll try and look at getting a breakdown where we identify where that's externally funded consultants and where it's internally funded. So we'll get you a little bit more detail.
Thank you. That'd be useful.
Well, we'll get that detail and then circulate it in the next few days, and then it'll be on the actions for the next meeting if you wish to raise anything, having looked at that further detail.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on page 24? Page 25? Page 26? Just at towards the bottom of 26, 81 A2, that will be coming to the next meeting. The Rough Sleeping Initiative draft report following the cause and effect course undertaken at the end of last year, and updates to be provided on data collected from the second year. So that's now finished, so we'll bring that to the next meeting. Anybody else on page 26? 27?
Yeah.
Yeah, Councillor Mossop and then Councillor McNally.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think it's just the actions held over from the 3rd of December 2019, and there seems to be a string of issues relating to waste, to the markets, and the tracker seems to have not had any further updates. And I'm just wondering whether to make the suggestion that we ask the portfolio holder, Councillor Foster, to come along to attend to deal with some of those outstanding issues, and the way forward for particularly recycling issues, which I have some local and rural issues to talk about, but I'm sure there are people who would like to hear a little bit more about the progress post-COVID and plans for the markets.
Yeah,
So I'm suggesting that he can be invited to a future meeting to get some of these issues.
Yeah, no, I think that would be an excellent idea. You know, I think we're all interested in post-COVID markets, and as you say, there's a lot of things on here that have been ongoing for some considerable time. So, you all happy? We invite Councillor Foster to the next meeting.
Yeah.
To talk about those issues. Right. Okay. Thank you, Councillor McNally.
Thank you, Chairman. Basically, what Councillor Mossop was on about, really, that I think it would. I tried to put my hand up on 26, but there was it was 33B.
Yeah.
And I can't remember, but I think that's a question I asked a couple of meetings ago, and there's obviously no update on that. And for me, since I watched the overview committee last month, and the glass recycling bins was brought up, and I wasn't sure if that was an action or not really. So I'd be quite interested to, you know, the same as what everyone else is, know what sort of the timescales are.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we'll make a note of all those issues, and then we'll invite Councillor Foster to the next meeting, which I think is March, is it, Elaine? And that, I think, would be an opportune time for him to answer some of these questions. Councillor Makinson-Saunders.
Well, we did look at the glass collections. We've looked at it many times, and because it's always been explained to us that because of the rurality of this area, glass, picking up glass is just too expensive and isn't a worthwhile thing. And if, it's a pity Councillor Edgington's not here today, because I think that was in part of the scrutiny that he did. He looked at that, and they decided it was no go. But it just keeps coming up, and you know, people just bring it's, you know, well, it always does, doesn't it?
But things do change, circumstances change, don't they? And it's something that I think ought to be under constant review, because other councils do manage to do it, really. Councillor Mrs Harrison.
Just to say, Chairman, actually one of the Skegness councillors had queried why glass was not being collected. There was a response indicating that there were a lot of staff off, either isolating or with COVID.
Yeah.
Okay.
Collection.
Thank you. Councillor McNally, did you? No, you come taking your hand down.
No. I'm just going to come back on that again. Obviously, the doing the paper and card rollout county-wide. I think East Lindsey is 22, which would be an opportune time to do the glass. But I'm more interested to know how many of these bins have been removed and what's the situation on. So it may be worth getting a list of questions together to pose before they come, so we're not bombarding them with a load of stuff they don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, if in the next, shall we say, week, people could email Elaine and myself with a list of issues or questions that they would like Councillor Foster to look at when he comes, and then we can prepare him in advance for what we might like to talk about. Councillor Parkin.
I was going to make exactly that point, Fiona, that there's so many knock-on issues to this. For example, where the bottle banks overflow in Louth, there's one in particular that's becoming then a spot for fly tipping. Yeah. And people think that they can just dump anything there. Well, they don't think that. They use it, and it's almost as if the glass overflowing has kind of encouraged this fairly laissez-faire attitude to the entire area, really. So I think some focus on it would help in terms of those knock-on issues that then are created by just the whole area looking so messy.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Makinson-Saunders.
I was going to ask about the paper and cardboard thing, because nobody's really told us about that at East Lindsey. It's something I've heard mentioned along the line, but I do think people will balk at having to have yet another bin, and who's going to pay for the bin, etc., etc. But unfortunately, you know, we don't know much about it, and you're taking people's good nature quite a long way if you're going to ask them to sort yet something else, really, aren't you? And certainly in the conservation areas, we don't want yet another bin, because that would be it's bad enough as it is. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you can send in questions, and then we can have a good discussion at the next meeting. Councillor Matthews, you are next.
I don't want to keep adding to things, and this is probably for the bin store areas in communities, but something that's come up through the COVID crisis for us in our community is, with the charity shops being closed and things like that, is the dumping of clothes and fabrics. And that, you know, I don't know why we are not doing that. There's a lot of these products that go into landfill sites. It should be something that should be on our radar. You know, we maybe need to be thinking about it. But there is a high proportion of clothes and fabrics that get put into landfill site, and I know that we haven't got bins in our area. We've just actually got a private bin for our project in Sutton-on-Sea, which we can earn funding from, which is very good. But we haven't got them alongside our glass bins in our community.
Yeah, okay, well, we can add that to the list. Councillor Meckinson-Saunders, you've had several goes.
No, I was just going to
Quickly.
answer Councillor Matthews and tell her that in Louth, certainly the Fire Brigade and the Salvation Army have collection bins for clothes and for fabrics. And I think they are quite heavily used. So there are other people that, if they've got a chance to put a bin in, probably would do.
Yeah, I mean, we have got, certainly our school's got them and the church has got them, but it is a big problem. And I think once we open up again, people will just take all their stuff to charity shops. They're going to be overwhelmed. And it's maybe something that should be on our radar a bit more.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Good.
Anybody got anything else on page 27? 28? Well, there's really nothing on top of page 28. Okay, so that's a major item then for next time's meeting. We're now on item 5 then, which is annual budget report, medium-term financial strategy, financial strategies and council tax. So Councillor Fry and Adrian, over to you, I think.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. What will probably happen here, if it's okay with you, is I've got a few observations to make, and then we'll obviously take questions, but Adrian will probably want to present a bit more of the detail of the budget to you before we do that. And I think Peter Davey is also on standby from PS2 and has worked very hard in constructing this budget, I have to say, and I thank him for that, certainly. So first of all, actually, it is a matter of my desire to extend my thanks to the finance team and the Section 151 officer for all their efforts, and indeed I also thank our service areas, because you'll be aware of the budget challenge process, and we wouldn't really be able to put together an appropriate budget estimate without their assistance, and I thank them for that as well. And I think we all know we are still, have been, and still going through challenging times. And so I don't think this is really particularly, no, it's not a normal budget at all. It's normal in the sense of the way it looks, but what we're focusing on is, and putting at the heart of this budget, is economic recovery. So for that reason, as you may well have noticed, we have a capital programme extending to £19.3 million over 5 years, which is really important. But I'm sure from an overview viewpoint of view, you'd like to know whether the budget is right. That's the major question, and it is, after all, an estimate. It is based on sound data, but it's also based on the assumptions which you'll see in the budget report itself. And these are well, as far as I'm concerned, they're cautious and they're sound, and that is an important adjunct towards producing a budget estimate, which is itself so good and sound. And we've done that, of course. And what you'll be seeing is that we're delivering a balanced budget, which after the year we've had from hell is quite impressive, I find anyway. And indeed, in terms of budget for the coming financial year, we're actually projecting a small but important surplus. However, you will, I'm sure, have noticed that we are retaining the requirement to increase council tax to the extent that we can, £4.95 per annum in terms of East Lindsey. And that in itself is also important. I'd like to be able to not do that, but we do need to do it. And there are reasons underlying that, not least, I realise that the IDBs do extremely important work, but I'm advised that they are increasing their request for precept by anything around 3%, and that will capture the whole of our. In fact, I'm wondering whether we shouldn't just get the IDBs to do the precepting for council tax. Anyway, sorry, that was facetious. I shouldn't say that. But the point is that we have increased costs. We do need and will want to deliver a balanced budget. So that underlies the requirement to increase council tax. There are also, of course, a lot of risks that we face going forward, and these are largely seen, I think, in the following year, 2022, 23, when the delayed comprehensive spending review is likely to come into place. And we would expect a rebasing of business rates and loss of a lot of grants, and that's going to hit us quite hard. And I'm sure you've noticed that in that year we're predicting about £1 million of deficit. We hope, well, obviously there are things that are not in our budget at the moment which will help us with that. And we would sort of probably identify further savings from the alliance with Boston, together with the fact that if Boston were to decide to take up the services of PSPS, that would result in a saving for councils of in order of £300,000, which is in itself extremely important. We'll also be looking to service area reviews and fees and charges in the coming years to fill the gap, I think, and indeed, whatever Investis Lindsay may deliver for us. So I think with having that all said, I'd be really happy for Adrian to go forward and indicate whatever he wants to bring to your attention. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Fry stole most of my thunder there, so I've not got too much more to add.
Oh, apologies.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Saves me having to say it, Richard. The only thing I would say is that I've been presenting a series of presentations to you during the course of this year to tell you where we are with the council's finances. Back in November, you may recall, I did a presentation showing that we thought we would have a surplus of about £150,000. At Members' Day, it was around about £70,000, and now we think it's nearer to £200,000. The reason, if you remember last year as well, we were reporting that there was a significant shortfall to find next year. The reason why the shortfall has passed on a year is pretty much because of COVID and the government's desire to do its fair funding review. They've moved it on a year. And as part of that process, it's expected that they will transfer funding from districts and boroughs to unitaries and county councils, because that's where they see the major pressures for adult social care and children's services going forward. So what it has done in a strange sort of way, COVID has brought us a year to have to make any savings. As Richard says, we've got, Councillor Fry says, we've got several plans in place to bridge that gap. But we still will have to work hard towards that, which is why we are proposing a council tax increase this year. I should also add that Pete Davey, who's done most of the work, is on the call today. He's got to go in about 5 minutes. So if you've got any really tricky questions about the detail, can you ask him first? Because it saved me having to ask him after the meeting and come back to you. So that's it. I'm happy to present a very positive picture for next year, but we are wary of the fact, well aware of the fact that we do need to make changes in subsequent years. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody got any questions for Mr. Davey? Councillor Meckinson-Saunders.
On page 11 of 31, which is page 43 of the agenda, which is confusing, the levy payment to Lincolnshire Pool, I think I understand, I know what it means, but why, if we're successful at doing it, aren't other district councils successful? And why should our ratepayers be put at a disadvantage that we are successful and prudent?
Mr. Davey?
Yes, just to answer that. So we're in a Lincolnshire business rates pool, and what that means is that the growth from any increase in business rates is retained locally between all members of the pool, rather than being paid over to the government. And I think East Lindsey's been a member of the pool for a number of years now to our benefit, and if we were to drop out of that arrangement, we wouldn't see those gains to the budget that we're seeing. So I think, the decision's been taken. We will pool for next year. That is the plan. We are forecasting growth, and if we were not going to forecast growth, we would drop out of the pool. But luckily, at the moment, that is what we were forecasting to remain in the pool.
So that's what we're paying out, not what we're getting back. Am I being dim here?
Yeah, no, that's the payment to the county council. Yeah, which is part of the benefit. Yeah.
Oh, is it a benefit? Oh, right. Perhaps I missed that. I'll just go and turn my telephone off. Excuse me a sec.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parkin.
I'm kind of, I don't quite know who wants to pick up this. Whoever, it is, whatever. In terms of COVID, what I'm kind of interested in is where have we spent less money than we would have done? for example, I'm thinking travel expenses, council's travel expenses. What kind of figures are we looking at? What are we doing with that? Where, you know, how is that balanced? Where have we spent more? And in the long term, are there, if anywhere, are there any kind of future lessons for learning, for more efficient working? Has it kind of encouraged, has it by default allowed us to find savings by accident that we now should try and keep hold of as an organisation overall? Because, you know, I'm aware that some of the things that have happened may, you know, the unintended consequences at times like this can sometimes be positive. And, you know, what are we learning from that and how are we moving forward? And also, you know, just to point out that in terms of council tax, that, you know, nobody enjoys increasing it, but it's that whole point, isn't it, that if we keep it artificially low, it's not just a problem for this year, but then subsequent years for the percentage increase moving forward. And I think, you know, it's very easy to grandstand and claim, you know, political kudos for saying it shouldn't be raised. But in fact, what we're doing there is we are making the future budgets unsustainable year on year on year. And so I just think it's really time for us as councillors, time for us to show a bit of maturity politically and actually give an honest appraisal of what this means and the implications of not doing it, rather than a kind of political grandstanding, really. So it's just a plea that we all remember that.
Okay, I think there was a question in there somewhere. Does somebody want to take that?
I'll pick up on that, Chair. In terms of COVID, you may recall that we presented a revised budget to full council around about September time of last year because of COVID. That talked about a £5 million pressure on the council's finances at the time. That was made up of largely income losses. So car park income was, I can't remember the figure, it must have been around about £1 million. There was around about £1 million on the caravan park as well. There were all sorts of other pressure. There were certain things like buying laptops, there were IT costs because we had to very, very quickly sort out remote working and those type of things. So in total, there was about £5 million pressure. Now, how we offset that was we reduced the repairs and maintenance. We stopped all emergency repairs by about £1 million. That has a knock-on effect in subsequent years. So there is a catch-up process required for that. So there is growth in next year's budget to catch up from that. We also expected some money to come from government grants to compensate us for this. And I was sceptical of this, I must admit, but the government, to be fair, has been true to their word. They have reimbursed councils significantly for COVID during the course of the year. So much so that we thought we were going to draw down £1.5 million worth of reserves as well to fund the COVID crisis. But in reality, it's been around about half of that. So that's roughly the ins and outs. Going forward, there's potential to make savings, although these can't be realised yet, but there's potential to make significant savings on office accommodation going forward, because I think it'll change our ways of working. There's certainly some scope in mileage and reductions. However, I would say it's very difficult to prize these savings out of budget holders until they actually see the evidence that they're not incurring these costs. So I think it's one for future years to keep our eye on rather than for next year. I think we've given them the benefit of the doubt for next year. And then we'll wait and see where we are when we start doing this process again next year. In terms of the council tax, I entirely endorse what you're saying there. To not have a council tax increase this year increases the deficit that we've got to find next year and subsequent years thereafter. I would also point out on council tax, sorry, I do appreciate that council tax increase is a contentious issue, particularly in these times. Now, what I would say is the element of the council tax that we're looking to increase, our proportion of it is £4.95, which for a Band E property is 9 pence a week, something like that. Most of the council tax increase will come from the police, who are looking at £15 because they can increase theirs more than we can. The county council, I think, is they're looking at a 2% increase, which equates to about £25 a year. And then, of course, you'll have the parish precepts impact. So our element of the council tax is really quite small compared to everybody else's, but it does have a big impact on our finances if we don't increase it. I think that answers all your points, Councillor Parkin.
Yeah, absolutely. And Fiona, I am really interested if there's a role for overview in terms of moving forward. I understand that we're in kind of the midst of the storm here in terms of, you know, the pandemic itself, and the changes that we've made have been rapid and forced upon us. But I do wonder if there is a piece of work for us to do in the, you know, medium term about what potential the changes in working practices have given us for sustainable savings moving forward. I mean, and then it could also be combined potentially with, you know, that more holistic view rather than a financial view of those financial practices. But it would be a shame just to go back to normal if there are sustainable financial wins for us moving forward from this.
Yeah, but I mean, we have got later in the agenda a discussion on topics and scrutiny, the scrutiny programme for the next year or so. But Councillor Meckinson Saunders and myself attended a East Midlands LGA course before Christmas on scrutiny and the COVID crisis. The problem, I think, about agreeing what sort of work to do in the middle of the crisis is that it keeps changing, and until you get to the end, it's difficult to know what to look at. But yeah, I think your point's well made, and there will be pieces of work, not just the one you've mentioned, but there will be other pieces of work, I think, arising from the COVID crisis that overview will be wanting to look at in the long term. So
absolutely, yeah. Thank
you.
Councillor
Mossop and then Councillor Meckinson Saunders.
Yeah, I think this my questions mainly refer to Councillor Fry, really. So apologies to Mr. Davey. Although it would have been really helpful to have had that explanation on the table relating to the which table is it? The one we've just been talking about there in terms of the oh dear, lost my place now. Not fees and charges, not that one.
Which page was it, Joe?
Sorry, yeah, page 11. The business rate. That's what I was trying to.
Yeah.
I would have. It would have been useful to go line by line down that one, because I found it quite difficult to understand that one. In terms of officer working groups, management team and member meetings, I just wondered, Councillor Fry, what involvement you as executive board members have had in relation to that, and how that system works. So we get the feedback on these major meetings, and it's been appreciative that you come along to regular updates, especially during the past year when it's been very difficult. So that would be helpful. In relation to the increase, I suppose really it would be helpful for the overview committee to give an agreement of a yay or nay to the percentage increase that's going to be shown on our bills, which is going to be around the 3% mark. I mean, I actually, in relation to the drainage board, was resisting a 3% rise in for the drainage board meetings that we've had in the past couple of months or so. But it makes sense to, and I fully understand what Councillor Parkin is saying in terms of keeping this at a level where we don't swing from nil increases because of the particular difficult year. Although I have a lot of sympathy, obviously, with residents who have to put their hand in their pocket a little bit deeper. But it's very telling on the bills that we receive that it's shown as a percentage increase, and I think the hit will be at county council and the police particularly. I also just wanted to ask about on page 7 of 31, the full-time equivalent of employees, the staffing levels. we're already beginning to see, I feel, the impact of the strategic alliance. On the good side, of course, being the savings it's doing, but on some of the negatives, perhaps our pressure it's putting on the management team in terms of increasing councillors, increasing service in committees, increasing geographic area. So they've got a wider area to deal with. So I just wonder what plans were the executive board making to streamline the two council structures in order to make the reductions in the full-time equivalent of employees actually happen. So are you planning on joint decision making on policies and strategies to fit both Boston and Borough and ELDC, or are we just keeping this same rather cumbersome decision making process that we've got, or are we actually moving forward to closer to something more streamlined?
Thank you. Councillor Fry, I think that was mainly
it was aimed at Richard, yeah.
Yes, not so much to do with the budget, but anyway. Right, okay. In terms of, obviously there is a management structure, officer management structure, which is headed by a chief executive officer, and they have senior management teams, and I'm not involved in those in any way, shape or form. As far as exec board members' involvement in management is concerned, we each have our portfolios, and mine's obviously finance, and I therefore attend and tend to chair a finance portfolio meeting on a monthly basis and a property portfolio meeting on a monthly basis, and officers of in the appropriate areas attend those meetings, and they also attend the management team meetings. So there is a crossover of information in that sense, but in the sense that am I involved in officer management team meetings? No, I'm not. So we have our portfolio meetings, and that is the structure which we use to gain that. I'll call it crossover, but I think it's the right thing, because members are here. We're here to give the political guidance to the management decisions that are made, and the policies, the strategies that are used by teams to deliver what the council requires, and the council being essentially the members who are elected by the residents. So that's what that's all about. Then I think you mentioned, please, if you want to come back on that, I'd be happy to try and fill in if I've missed the point or whatever. And then in terms of the council tax, I think you mentioned the desirability of overview taking a stance in respect of increases in council tax. And I think that's what you do. I mean, you need to review it. You need to be aware. We need to give you enough information to make a decision as to whether that seems the right or reasonable thing to do. I would comment there that back at the start of the last administration, not this one, but 2015, I think I'm thinking of, we needed to put a transformation program in place, and one of the items of the transformation program was a decision that over the years of the administration we would, as a matter of principle, increase council tax to the extent that we were allowed to. And you're quite right, because by many years of not increasing council tax, we had indeed shot ourselves in the foot, because government came along and said, you may not increase it more than 2.9% or £5, and 2.9% was extremely small amount of the amount of council tax. In other words, we weren't in a position to utilise council tax as a tool to increase our ability to deliver services to residents. And so currently, increasing council tax generates a small but important amount of money, and we just need so. I've made a personal decision to pursue the transformation programme policy of continuing to increase council tax until we're at a sort of level where we can actually use it as a tool, which is not really quite the case at the moment. So and overcoming that issue of the fact that not doing so in the past causes problems in the future. In terms of staffing levels, FTEs, there's actually, as I'm understanding it, the alliance hasn't generated any. Well, it generated some senior redundancies, as you'll know. I mean, the CEO of Boston was one of them, and 151 officer was another one. So it's generated some savings in that sense. Sorry, my wife is just bringing me a cup of tea. Oh, it's coffee.
All right, I'll have one too.
I'm going to say,
Sorry, I apologise. So yes, I don't think we are with no real intention that I'm aware of in any sense of the Alliance necessarily reducing the number of staff. It does, however, give us the opportunity to more efficiently use senior officers to operate in a management sense. Well, I want a singular CEO for both authorities, and a singular 151 officer, a singular monitoring officer, and this seems good to me. But at the same time, in as much as it affects me in finance, we maintain our independence and our ability to set our own budget and make our own decisions. However, having said that, it is nevertheless the case that teams are being rationalised. I mean, the senior officer who sits in on property portfolio is now Andy Fisher from Boston, and it's you know, he's looking at property in both East Lindsey District and Boston Council, and from the point of view of both finance and property meetings, at the finance meeting, Jonathan Noble, who is my equivalent at Boston, sits in on my finance portfolio meters and I on his. So that, you know, I think there's been an appropriate level of coordination, both in terms of the principles and policies and the management teams. And that's still moving forward. And indeed, the fact that Boston are now talking and haven't made a decision, but I hope they are going to decide to take up the services of PSPS, which means that I think something in the order of 50 to 70, I'm not quite sure, but the administrative teams in Boston will become, if they make that decision, they'll become staff of PSPS and they'll deliver services to Boston, East Lindsey and South Holland, which overall for everybody generates efficiencies, which saves each of the parties in that money. So there's a huge amount. We're at the start of this trek, actually, and what has happened so far, I think, is happened very rapidly. It hasn't caused the sort of upset and confusion that it could have done, and that's because I think we do have an excellent officer cadre both in Boston and in East Lindsey, and they have been able to make this a smooth transition. Sorry, I've probably said much too much.
No, I think you've.
Do you want to come back at all on?
Yeah, if I may come back.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you've been very positive and encouraging about that, Councillor, and because at the end of the day, when you go down these routes of closer cooperation with other corporate bodies, you know, you are actually looking at also the end goal. And what I'm concerned about is the bumpy ride that we might have, where we resist any further moves forward to coming together. And that's where the full-time equivalent employee that I've hooked onto is a little bit of a concern, that we do need to progress that. And if, you know, dare I say the word merger, is perhaps an end goal. And what I'm trying to fish for is that you know, you're thinking in the same way that perhaps I am, that eventually, rather than trying to iron out these difficulties of servicing two councils in the same way, in the same way, to the same level, and so on and so forth, without actually increasing the staff levels, the end goal might be that we look at it in a more radical way further down the line. So it is part of the budget to me, very much so, because we have to bear in mind that whatever we do and the demands we make as councillors will put a cost onto it if we continue to sort of fly the flag of independent thinking and that. You know, we're all part of Eastern Lincolnshire, so it's just putting that forward. And finally, I'd just like a view from other members of Overview about the increase, because it's something that I would probably support once we've had more discussion and thought about it. But to me, it seems a sensible way forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a lot of interesting points been made in the last few minutes, really. I mean, the point about small increases rather than nothing over the years is one that I think we've had a debate about in parish councils as well as the district council over the years. And in hindsight, which is a marvellous thing, maybe all the years we had no % increase didn't actually do us any favours, because what you have at the end of the day at some stage is to then have a rather large increase because you've got so far behind everybody else and you can't deliver services without the resources to do so. And that's an ongoing debate. I was just interested to know where we're likely to stand in Lincolnshire. Do we have any feeling as to, I mean, I know we're already a long way behind sort of Lincoln City as far as the council tax we charge is anyway. But I didn't know if we had any feeling as to where we might sit after where everybody else has put increases on.
I think we're the lowest in Lincolnshire, aren't we, Pete?
Lowest in East
I thought we
Midlands.
were.
Yeah, he's nodding his head.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Councillor Moss up there sort of threw out a challenge to other members of Overview for their comments or any comments on the 3% plus increase. Anybody else have a view on that? Councillor Makinson Saunders?
Well, 3% on the small amount is footling, really, isn't it? Percentages really don't mean a huge amount, really, do they? I mean, Mrs. Stevenson certainly did our residents a disservice by always stopping council tax increases, and we're starting from such a low basis. I mean, the claim that we're the cheapest place in the East Midlands was pathetic, really, wasn't it? It doesn't really matter. If the people need the services, we need to charge for them. I really wanted to go back to the drainage boards because I think we've got a bit of a thing about the drainage boards and putting up their things. And I've been thinking about how we can get this over to residents, because people will come back and say, oh, East Lindsey is putting up the council tax yet again and we're not getting any better services. When we have that list where it says X amount of your council tax is going to, could we, because I think we print them, don't we? Could it actually be in brackets after East Lindsey District Council, including the whatever drainage board or the drainage boards, because it's probably boards within our area, so that people do get the idea that their council tax isn't just going to East Lindsey. Because I think it's a really important thing we need to get over to people, that it isn't just to go in our coffers, because they will it's the expectation at the end of the day. So I did wonder if that was another way of getting over to people, so that they could ask us the question and we could explain that, Lindsey Marsh Drainage is taking another 3%, and I don't know what Witham is taking and all the rest of it. But that would help to explain, because the people, I do think people they might just stop and look at that because they might feel a bit peeved at the moment. But some people are saving money, some people aren't saving money. But I think you're right. We did start from a low base, thanks to Mrs. Stevenson, and we do have to be grown up about it. Things are costing more money. If we want those services, we have to pay for them, don't we?
Thank you. Councillor Harrison and then Councillor Devereux.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I agree with Jill. I think we should make the people who pay the council tax more aware of how much money does go to the drainage boards. Not that I'm making any comment about the drainage board, because I think the work they do is absolutely amazing, particularly in the Marsh area. But could we perhaps suggest that some sort of information about it goes out with the council tax bills?
Yeah, I think that was what was being suggested, and Councillor Fry's nodding, so I think he's taken that on board.
So that everybody gets one.
Yeah,
And I've done my best to tell my parish councils, but you know they still don't get it. So I think with the council tax account, it perhaps might become more realistic to them.
Okay, Adrian, did you want to make a comment on that?
If I could please, Chair. Yeah, the reason why the council tax bill is laid out the way it is because it's heavily prescribed how we have to do it. So there's a lot of choice. It's not in our gift to list the IDB levies separately, so it has to be included in our precept. Excuse me. There is a group of councils that are trying to lobby the government about how this operates, because in theory, in my view, there's no reason why the drainage boards shouldn't put a separate levy as part of the council tax, the same way as the police do or the parishes do, and it should be shown separately on the bill. But we don't have a choice in that at the moment. Now, I don't expect things to change in the near distant future on this, because these things take years and years to ever change. So I do endorse the view that the way to do this in the short term is to do it through our own publicity and raise our awareness that way. And we'll look to do that when we do future consultations and publicise anything about the budget going forward.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Devereux.
Thank you, Chairman. Pretty much the same what every other councillor has said, really. I would agree with support the rise, but also it is in the communication, isn't it? It's getting our residents to really understand what they're paying for. We probably all suffer the same thing. The council is putting it up by X amount, always looking for more money. And I don't think people really do understand how that money is split up. I know with the police and LCC, it is on our bills. Maybe on the back of what Adrian was saying, in our publicities, maybe our social media, etc., is a way to get that message across more to our residents. I think if they understand more, they wouldn't feel quite so aggrieved. Everyone's finding it difficult at the moment, but if we can explain it in a more user-friendly way, and not everybody does with their council tax bills, let's be honest, they hit them, you see the increase and there's that sharp intake of breath. If we can do something to try and get that message across, I would be very supportive of that. I think it would be helpful for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Adrian, you wanted to come back?
I did, please, Chair, because I think we oughtn't to lose sight of the fact that the drainage boards do some incredibly important work, and it is a valuable thing that they do. One thing that we discussed at, funnily enough, a Boston meeting a night or two ago was asking one of the major drainage boards to come to an overview committee meeting and talk about the type of things that they do. And we can have this wider discussion with them there, so it gives people a better understanding. So if members of the committee are in favour of that, I'm happy to try and invite the drainage board, one of the larger ones, to come and do a presentation to you in the forthcoming year.
I wonder actually if that might be a good thing to do to the Reserve Members' Day to widen the audience slightly. I mean, going back a few years, we used to do that. We used to have an annual meeting with the CEOs and the chairman of all the drainage boards that we fund or partly fund. It's something that we've lost in recent years, but it used to be quite informative and quite helpful actually to understand what they were spending their money on and what they intended to spend their increase on, and for us to sort of get the message across to them also about how what they want affects our budget. So it was a two-way communication that was quite helpful. So I think something similar, or one of the drainage boards to reinstate that would be good. But I think it would be good for a Reserve Members' Day to widen the audience, really.
I think we need representation from all three drainage boards that cover our area, because I think they operate in quite different ways in some respects. Certainly, the larger one does have a consortium work, and it very much on the lines of East Lindsey, not making money out of other people's drains, but the fact that they operate in a far wider area does mean that their overhead costs are considerably lower, and that's a benefit to our council area and our ratepayers. So I'd like to hear the views from the wider drainage board, the Witham Third and Fourth, to come along as well. And I think it would be a really useful debate to have them all together, because they all ought to be working a bit more closely together.
I think there are actually 4, aren't there, that we sit on. I mean, I'm missing the Witham Third this morning because I can't be in 2 places at once. But I mean, that's now a consortium of 4 drainage boards or 5 drainage boards and 1 chief executive and staff. So compared to where that was when I first sat on it as a standalone drainage board, they've made a lot of progress in reducing their overheads and costs and everything else. And it would be good, I think, for everybody to understand how that's all working.
Yeah, great.
Okay, well, that's another action then from this morning. I've got nobody else indicating they wish to speak. My only question that I had was, I know from the executive board a couple of weeks ago that the draft budget's gone out for consultation. I wondered when that consultation closed and what happened to the feedback from that consultation. Is that going back to your portfolio, Councillor Fry, to consider before the final budget's put forward? Or I don't think the timescales will allow for that feedback to come back to overview, but presumably that goes somewhere and needs to be considered.
It's out for 6 weeks, Chairman, and when it gets back, it certainly comes back to us and it forms part of my report to council.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else have anything? If not, the recommendation is that the draft medium-term financial strategy and associated financial strategies are reviewed by overview committee, and I think we've done that this morning, and feedback is provided to the executive board. Elaine, I know, is frantically taking notes, and I presume Councillor Fry and Adrian, you've taken on board what we've said this morning, and that will be fed back to the executive board.
We have indeed.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you very much. If nobody else has anything on that item, then thank you very much, Councillor Fry, Mr. Davey and Mr. Sibley. We're quite happy for you to stay and listen to our deliberations, but we understand that you'll have other things you want to do. So thank you very much indeed for your attendance.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We'll go on then to item 6, which is the Health Scrutiny Committee for Lincolnshire. It does say on the agenda verbal report, but very kindly, Councillor Mrs. Harrison did last Thursday, I think, following the meeting last Wednesday, send us out a written report, which was, as usual, Councillor Mrs. Harrison, very helpful. Thank you very much. We are very grateful for the superb work you do, especially sending us written reports, because it does help to concentrate minds, and it is very much appreciated. Thank you very much. Did you want to add anything to this?
Yes, I don't know whether you want to deal with questions first, because I've got a few things to mention other than that. Does anybody?
Are there any questions on the written report first then? Councillor Meckinson-Saunders.
Well, I wondered if there was any discussion about the figures that came out last week, which said that East Lindsey had the worst, which is, this is quite incredible. East Lindsey has the worst record in the whole country for COVID deaths of people of a certain age. And I thought, actually, if you sit down and think about it, what the reasons ought to be, because of GPs, no big hospitals, people with lots of asthma and all those sort of things. And I wondered if that had been discussed at all at Lincoln. My big frustration is that most people, and we've spoken about it countless times before, that most people in this northern end of the district actually use Grimsby Hospital, and we get all the information about Lincoln and all of that, but we never know anything much about Grimsby, and that's really important to our population, isn't it? And that is a huge frustration, I think. But I was concerned when I read the report about the COVID deaths, and given that we have such a low incidence of COVID around here, Mrs. Stevenson would like this, wouldn't she? The lowest in the East Midlands. It just seemed peculiar to me.
Well, I mean, we do have a low incidence at the moment, but we didn't, did we, before, before
no,
Christmas?
but
At one
probably
stage,
work out
we
what
were,
that was.
at one
Yeah.
stage, we were top of the list rather than bottom, which
Yeah.
was worrying, I have to
Wasn't it?
say. Councillor Mrs. Harrison, do you want to comment
Yeah.
on that?
First question, no, there's been no mention of that. And as I've said before, you know, all the health organisations are under a lot of pressure at the moment. So in a way, we get what we're given.
Yeah.
About Grimsby, yes, I queried it in one of the meetings about the fact that, yes, we get ULHT responses and figures, but nothing for our area that tend to go towards Grimsby. And of course, the same is about Peterborough as well. Actually, I was cut off quite sharply and said that, you know, if we want the information, to look at the Health Scrutiny Committee for the area that includes Grimsby. So I made no progress at all. And I tried to find out whether the figures that are quoted, for instance, on the news report, whether that actually does include our figures for East Lindsey or not. So far, my questions have not been answered, but perhaps it's something that the committee could query.
And it is important because people, residents don't get the choice of which hospital they go to. You go to wherever the ambulance is going to take you.
Yeah, I think I did mention it to the chairman, actually. Chairman, a question to ask the LRF, but nothing has come back.
Yeah.
Right. The other things were, if I may mention, I keep giving these reports, but I'm sure it must be ever so difficult for committee members to understand actually how our local NHS works and how all the different organisations are linked and what work they do. I jotted it out for myself to try and keep abreast of what's coming through. So would it be helpful if, when I've got time, I brief that out for the committee?
I think that would be extremely useful, actually, because I think especially at the moment with the COVID vaccines, there's a lot of confusions about how PCGs fit into structures. For example, in Horncastle, if you go to the government website, it says your nearest vaccination centre is Spilsby, but that's a different PCG from Horncastle. And if there are any Horncastle people going to Spilsby, it's only the odd one or two. Mostly they're going to Louth, which is 14 miles away and not the 10 miles away that Spilsby is. So how the interrelationship between a lot of these things is difficult for people to understand. So I think that would be extremely useful, Councillor Harrison, if you wouldn't mind letting people have that.
No,
I've got Councillor Parkin, and then I'll come back to you for the other things you wanted to mention, if that's okay. Councillor Parkin.
Yeah, I think I do agree with Jill. I am concerned about that, that anomaly in terms of Grimsby Hospital. I know that when I was on Adult Scrutiny Committee at Lincoln, we did have quite an honest conversation and data and statistics and you know, particularly about on early discharge, delayed discharge, that kind of thing. And they were looking, social care at that time, were looking at both Grimsby and Boston. And it was an issue that on adult social care we were really, really aware of. In fact, you know, most of our residents, when you combine those who went to Boston and those who went to Grimsby, statistically, you were more likely to end up there than you were in Lincoln. So if they can do that from an adult social care perspective at the county council, I really don't understand why they can't do that from a health scrutiny perspective. And I do wonder if there is a role for us, Fiona and Overview, in terms of putting a bit of pressure on and showing a bit of support to Sandra on this, because I she's asked the questions and seems to have been shot down, and I don't think that's good enough.
But I think there's still an outstanding issue that I know. I think Anne, you're still there, aren't you, Anne? Good. And I know that Anne is trying to get somebody for a reserved members day to come and talk at some stage about hospital services, etc. Because I think that there were some people Councillor Mrs Harrison suggested would be good to get to come and talk to us. I mean, the one of the issues I suspect is at the minute is that they're so busy trying to keep all the balls in the air at the hospitals and the NHS in Lincolnshire, that they haven't really got time to come and talk to us at a reserved members day. But I mean, that's one way of putting pressure on them, I think, about this issue of Grimsby. And did you want to just make a comment about reserved members day?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Martin. It was raised through Michelle Howard, having the contacts there, and with the information that Overview had passed forward, the invite is still flagged, and we will keep, we'll keep it flagged there, and any update bring back to the committee. But you're quite right, it was the timing issue that prevented it at this moment. And they couldn't see their way to programming something in to attend just at the moment, but we will keep it flagged for the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Fiona, I've just got a second supplementary, if that's okay for Sandra.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sandra, in terms of long COVID, I mentioned that at the last meeting. Has any information been given on that yet? And I think, again, in terms of the discrepancies between where our patients go between North East Links, South, and then Lincoln, again, that we could end up where we've got an anomaly in terms of what East Lindsey District residents can access in terms of that rehabilitation. And so I do think it's a really live issue. I mean, I don't have I know that we have the data that we have at the moment in terms of infections and deaths and all the rest of it, but have we got any idea at all of how many people might be struggling with long COVID and needing that longer term care? I'm just not aware locally at all that anyone's having those discussions anywhere, and it does worry me.
Thank you.
No, Chairman, it's not been mentioned, but it has in the media, as we all know. If I'd had time, I'd have tried looking it up on the website to see, if there's anything nationally. But I haven't had time yet, but that's my suggestion, that we look at it that way at the moment. Because to be honest, all these organisations, they're just producing bits of paper with not really a lot of information. A lot of it we've had ever so many times before. Obviously, if the opportunity arises, I'll mention it. But I think things are going to be as they are for quite a few months at the moment.
Yeah. Councillor Harrison, how can we help you by applying pressure with the issue of Grimsby and figures? What can we do as a committee to help you with that?
Well, I think, Chairman, doing as I did, that hasn't had a response, writing to our leader, who goes to the Lincolnshire forums, etc., the LRF, that meet with all the other partnership organisations as well, and make that point. Where do we get to know how our residents in Grimsby are being affected and what the figures are?
So, Councillor Leyland, you mean?
Starting point, yes.
Yeah, we can do that. Can we put that as an action, Elaine, from this meeting to write from the Overview Committee to Councillor Leyland? Perhaps Councillor Mrs Harrison, you could help us write that letter to make sure we make the points that need making, I think.
Will do, Chairman.
Okay, Councillor Meckinson Saunders.
Well, I did actually send Councillor Leyland an email about that as well, because I really do have concerns over it, and it's important for, you know, a big chunk of people, isn't it? And the Resilience Forum is dealing with the COVID outbreak. Well, part of the COVID is people going to Grimsby, isn't it? So it should be, you know, Lincolnshire. They want to have a greater Lincolnshire, but they only want to have it when it suits them, don't they? When we start asking questions about somewhere on the margins, oh no, can't answer that one. So it is important, and the Resilience Forum ought to be considering that as well, shouldn't they? It's very timely, is probably what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, okay. Right, thank you very much. Councillor Mrs Harrison, did you want to raise some other points?
Yes, please, Chairman. I attended an online event last week that was the presentations from the Lincolnshire Partnership Foundation Trust, the one that I usually refer to as the LFPT, and it was about the services that they offer, and they actually do provide the services for mental health. So seeing as it's an important issue at the moment, I wondered if it'd be helpful to members if I give Elaine the links and it's forwarded out so anybody that wants them can have them. Because, you know, there's great concern about mental health in all communities at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that would be very helpful, I think, please, if you could do that.
Will do, thank you.
Was there anything else you wanted to raise, Councillor Mrs Harrison?
No, that's the lot. Thank you, Chairman.
Lovely. Well, again, I think we've had a good debate this morning, and we've got some good actions, hopefully, to assist you with your work. And I say we do thank you very much for everything that you do. It is much appreciated. We'll move on then to item 7, which is update some scrutiny and policy panels, including quality checking. And the only one that we've got is the proposal for third shareholder in PSPS Limited working group, which did meet at fairly short notice, and you did all have a copy of that report before and when it went to full council last week, the extra full council meeting. I would like to thank everybody who worked on that, because it was a very short notice piece of work, but I thought it was an excellent piece of work, and that just shows that scrutiny can be done quickly and sharply if necessary and in the right conditions. And I would like to thank Lewis Duckett, who did a superb presentation that I think helped focus minds greatly, and all councillors and officers who supported that. So unless anybody had got any questions, because we did have a debate, I think, at full council last week, but Councillor Makinson Saunders?
I think that the scrutiny group at Boston looked at it in the last few days, and believe it or not, it was a 6-5 vote in favour of joining. Now, 6-5 is pretty close, isn't it? I think there are some concerns about that, but it'll go forward to their cabinet, which I'm sure will agree to it. But there's still a lot of, there's an undercurrent, isn't there still? And I don't think we really appreciate some of this, do we?
I think that's probably going to be a little while before it dies out, really. But I did intend to sit in on their meeting, you know, virtually, and listen and see what was said. But unfortunately, it was confidential, so I couldn't. It was all done in pink. I think that was right, wasn't it, Alison? So I say I had intended to observe it and just see what they did say, but couldn't. So there we go. Okay, if there's nothing else on that, we'll move on to number 8, which is scoping and scrutiny of scrutiny and policy topics. And thank you very much, Alison. We have got on page, I'm just going to try and find the right page now. Page 125, we've got the tackling housing standards topic as the first of possibly 3 pieces of work on housing. If we agree the scope this morning, then Alison will get on, or Elaine will get on with advertising for people to join this panel. So Alison, did you want to say anything about this?
No, I don't think so. Nothing to add. Just to ask if people are happy with that scope. I tried, obviously, to pull it together from the discussion at the last meeting, but I know a couple of you in particular were interested in this aspect of the broader housing topics. So feel free to make any suggestions either in the meeting or if you want to email me afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parkin. You're muted, Sarah.
There we go, sorry. I guess I'm fine with it in terms of what we've got there. But in terms of the lines of inquiry, I did wonder if it was worth putting something about trying to gauge where we stand nationally in terms of how will the councils measure their housing quality and obviously regionally as well, because I think that this would give this is so important. But for me, we need a comparator, I think, in terms of where we are now. When, you know, can we find examples of really good practice elsewhere? You know, how does the quality of our housing stock compare to others? Just so we've got that sense of overall context where we sit as well, even if it's only regionally.
Thank you. I'm sure we could add that in. I've got Councillor Matthews and then Councillor Mossop. Councillor Matthews.
Thank you. I mean, I'm sort of going to reiterate a bit what Sarah said about the national standards. I think it's 2030 they want to have eradicated poverty, and I do think housing is a huge part of that. And also the rents. It just seems ironic that you could actually get a mortgage cheaper than you can get rented property if you can afford to actually get a mortgage. And it's this sort of cycle of, you know, like what is it, the credit score and things like that. These, you know, some people in poverty cannot get on the housing ladder because of poor credit scores. And I just didn't know whether there could be something in it around the rent. And I know there are schemes where you can part own, but I just don't think they're working. And it's just about the bigger picture about the poverty, eradication of poverty by 2030, and how I'm not quite sure how, Alison, but maybe you can think about how that could be sort of written in, because housing is a big part of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if that comes in one of the later, you know, because we split it up into 3 areas. I think maybe the second phase that we said we'd look at might pick up more around that. So this was very much around kind of the quality of the housing and the housing standards. So what I'll do is when I'll do the scope for the other 2 anyway, ready for the next meeting, and I'll make sure that we capture some of that in those other scopes. Is that okay?
Yeah, and just something, sorry, can I just come back on that, around affordability, around housing that is easier and cheaper to run through green energy, because again, the poverty trap is the huge bills on electricity and things like that, and whether that's also written into this standard document as well.
Yeah, I'll get that. That does fit in really well, so I'll include something on that, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Mossop and then Councillor Meckinson Saunders and then Councillor McNally.
All right, so, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I support the lines of inquiry. I think enforcement and targeting are quite key areas about how effective we can be in a very specific issue on standards. It has shocked me when I've heard of cases where housing standards have been operating, and hearing the level of rents people are paying for for housing that is subject to housing standard enforcement. It's quite horrifying in some ways. So I think we ought to move on to this as quickly as possible and get some expressions of interest from other councillors who want to join this particular one. And I hope we do get some good response from it.
Yeah.
So
Thank
yeah,
you.
the comparator one that Councillor Parkin mentioned is, I think, can be quite useful to see what else, particularly if we're looking at coastal communities and rural districts like ours. So I think that might be useful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Makinson-Saunders.
Well, in the past they had Parker Morris standards for social housing, which ensured that houses were built to a good standard for families. And sadly, whichever government it was got rid of them, but it was at least a baseline, and it was a very good baseline. They're good, solid houses. A lot of those houses built just after the war with the Parker Morris standards. It does worry me that planning doesn't take. And planning policy doesn't take this into account. And you look at some of the estates that are being thrown up, and we know that they're if you talk to local craftsmen and they tell you how subcontractors are employed to do it, we're building the slums of the future. And I think planning ought to have a role somewhere in some of this. It's a good place to start. Somebody from building control ought to be able to be brought in on this to ensure. And I don't know if you can have your own standards in an area or if you're just simply covered by the NPPF and all the rest of it. But I think there are other strands to this as well.
Yeah. I think that's something that could be brought in to one of the panels. Would this one be the appropriate one, Alison? Or
yeah, that definitely fits into phase 3. Sorry, if you go down a couple of pages, you'll see the timetable or a draft timetable.
Yeah,
and you'll see that the housing's split into three phases, as we discussed at the last meeting. So Jill, that's definitely absolutely the core of the third panel around housing.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McNally, you've taken your hand down. Did you want to speak or not?
No, I'm okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, having listened to the comments this morning, Alison will amend the scope accordingly. And are you happy to accept this and send it out for invitations as soon as possible to get this panel working? Yeah, can I just have a show of hands? Everybody happy? Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Alison, for that one. And the next one is 8B on page 127, which is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals Scrutiny Panel. This came from Councillor Newman. Do you need to go now?
Yeah, sorry. Just before you start the next one, Fiona, I've got a meeting at 12, so I need to dash off. So I'm really sorry about that.
No, thank you very much for coming.
Just before I go, and I know I'm skipping the agenda, I did have a little suggestion. Do you want me to email it to you, Fiona?
Do you want to put it into chat for
yeah,
me? And
I'll do it before I go.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, then. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
So on page 127, this came from the notice of motion that came to full council a couple of council meetings ago. If you remember, I did suggest at the time that maybe this was something that a scrutiny panel should have a look at to see what and if anything that the council did could influence this particular piece of work, really, or these goals, really. So you've got on page 127 a draft scope. This won't go out straight away, will it? Or are we thinking that it would?
Yeah, I think we've got this sort of running at a similar time to the first housing one. What I didn't want to do was introduce two housing ones in parallel, because I thought some of the same people might be interested in both sets of housing panels. So I've suggested in the timetable that this kind of runs alongside that the first phase of the housing.
Yeah. And it does fit quite well with the work that Councillor Phil Smith chaired the panel looking at carbon management. A lot of the issues in here are similar to those looked at by that panel. So I obviously can't speak for him, but it would be, I think, quite good if he could sort of volunteer and even chair this panel as well. Right, I've got Councillor Matthews first.
I mean, it's going to be a huge amount of work to do all 17 goals, isn't it? My thought would be just to pull out maybe 2 or 3. And first of all, we touched on the poverty, the ambition for no poverty by 2030. Our coastal areas still continue and have for the last 40 years to be in the top 4 of the most deprived communities in England. So I'd certainly like to have a look at that. Just trying to think. There's some things that sort of fit round. I mean, I would like something around the rural economy. And I don't know which way, I mean, they've got life on the land, but that's very broad. Sustainable rural communities would be quite good. I know they've got sustainable cities and communities. I mean, it's so broad. I just wonder what other people think as well. But it would be good to do some of the things on here as well. I don't know what other people's thoughts are.
Can I just comment on that before you move on?
Yeah.
That I think the line of inquiry really is to look at which of these are most relevant to East Lindsey. So I think rather than going through absolutely all of them and looking at how they're linking with our corporate strategy or how they're linking with other work that we're doing, it's about maybe, like you say, Councillor Matthews, maybe drawing out 1 or 2 or 3 of them that are of particular relevance.
I think,
the priorities that we've set already.
I think particularly around the rural communities, the things that we struggle with, which is about what we've discussed this morning: health, education, deprivation and poverty.
Yeah, I think it was just that more focused view of this was the reason for it coming to scrutiny, rather than just being sort of approved or voted against as a general motion encompassing all 17. So yeah, I'm sure we could do that. Councillor Mackinson Saunders.
Well, I'm with Helen. I just think the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, if you live in Africa, are going to be very different from living at Salfleet, really, aren't they? Whilst I have sympathy with some of them, and I think Helen's come up with some much better ones, which aren't part of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So to me, this is more sixth form debating society. They should have sat down first, gone through this list and picked out some. You could do this in one meeting and then go on and then say, this is what we'd like to discuss at scrutiny. But I don't think this is developed sufficiently. And whilst it is kind-hearted and good, and I'm sure it ticks lots and lots of boxes, I don't think, to me, this doesn't tick. It hasn't got it right. And I think Helen was completely correct about that.
Yeah, if I can just draw your attention to the objectives and key issues. So it does say consideration of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals and their relevance and importance to the work programme and priorities of ELDC. So it is very much focused on looking at the content of these and looking at those that are relevant to East Lindsey, our work programmes that we've got already and priorities that we've set. So I don't think there was ever an intention of sort of trying to squeeze them all into ELDC. And actually, if you go on to their website and have a look at these, so a lot of them are targeted at extremely poor countries in terms of what they're wanting to achieve. So some of them are definitely much more relevant than others.
Well, peace, justice and strong institutions, East Lindsey can have absolutely nil effect on things like that. It should have been, I still think it should have been sorted out better than this before it got to this stage. And it's all very well. Where are you going to get, we're fiddling Mark's Rome Burns. We've got a whole world out there which has got COVID problems. There are things that we could be looking at that would be better for our communities right now. This is something we could do as a frilly little bit of work when you had time to do it. But there are so many pressing problems for our residents. I just think, you know, this is very worthy, but is it the right time to be doing it?
Well, we're going to have a discussion in a minute about the programme, but we did ask, and we've asked several times for people to put forward topics for scrutiny and discussion. And I mean, we got very limited response to that. And this can be put back further in the programme if you feel that that's the appropriate place for it. But all I would say is, apart from the housing ones, there is very limited scrutiny panels being suggested by all of us at the moment. So if you've got other more,
yeah, well, we were meant to be following up the Boston thing, weren't we? We've done one lot of work on it, and then we were meant to, but that hasn't appeared in the list at all, has it? We're meant to be having a meeting with Boston to discuss scrutiny and so forth. We're losing sight of those things which have an immediate effect. And there are, as I think you said earlier in the day, COVID change, all the COVID stuff changes on a weekly basis, if not almost not on a daily basis. And I think there are some bits coming out of that which we could probably pick up on and do some work on. And so if you wanted any more ideas, I think some more ideas could come forth.
Well, our programme always allows for us at least one topic to come forward as an emergency or an urgent action anyway. I mean, we haven't lost sight of the Boston joint scrutiny. I mean, it's something that's been worked on and looked at, and at least an annual joint meeting was written into the agreement that we had with Boston. And I mean, I do keep asking, and I will continue to ask where officers are at organising that, because it's important. But I just still think it's a little bit early to put COVID stuff into the programme at the minute. But if there are urgent issues, it's always open to all of you to bring those forward at any time. But we can move this back in the programme if that's the general feeling of the meeting. Councillor McNally.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm totally with Jill on this one. I think it's a waste of time, resources, most of it waffle, and a lot of it's covered in the climate change policies that East Lindsey has adopted anyway. So we're just going over old ground when we don't really need to. But the other point is poverty has been mentioned quite a lot on some of these sort of reports, whether it's housing or this one. Can we have, if these come to a scrutiny, can we have a definition of poverty? Because I'm really unsure of actually where it sits. Is it an income sort of generated thing? Is it spare income? Is it how much you earn? What is it? Because I hear it too many times that so many people are in poverty. I kind of don't believe it sometimes, so I would just like a proper definition of what people are saying they use for poverty, if you ever do a scrutiny for poverty. In fact, it's probably worth sending out anyway. That's all, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask Alison in a minute about that, if she knows if there is anything. I've got Councillor Mossop and then Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think there's always a bit of a danger of driving the agenda from one particular corner of the council chamber. And I think our mistake was at full council to be very nice and say, yes, this was a good idea. And I think that saying that it might be considered by overview and scrutiny, yeah, that's the right idea, and we're considering it now. And I think the decision that we're coming towards, which is to defer this and kick it down into the long grass for the time being, is probably the right one, because we ought to be getting a broader view about what we should be looking at. For example, I was going to suggest at a later time in this agenda about what we should be looking at on the forward plan, and there's 2 or 3 things on there that I'd like to know what they're about, that the executive board decisions are coming up with. So asset transfers, for example, and an emergency plan I saw, which are all things that perhaps we should be looking at as key important issues. So I would agree that we ought to defer this at this stage.
Okay, thank you. I'm getting the feeling that's the general consensus, but Councillor Parkin, you were next. You're muted, Sarah.
Sorry, Fiona. I do agree. I don't doubt the motives at all. But I think we're kind of remiss if we don't, in our considerations of it, also consider the timing and consider the importance of it for the here and now. And in fact, when I was looking at the 17 goals and aligning it with our corporate strategy, I was actually quite content with an awful lot of the stuff that we were doing. And in fact, I do think it can be quite a quick piece of work for us to get that reassurance that, you know, we are aligned. But I think ultimately, in terms of what do our residents need from us at this point, I wouldn't say it's this particular piece of scrutiny. I think the ones on housing are imperative. Daniel, I think the work, I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about was re-looking at the child poverty scrutiny that we did a few years ago. But in fact, I think we're best holding fire on that, because I think some of the stuff that comes out from the housing scrutinies might actually cast some light on that and give us other directions to go on. So, you know, I'm content to hold fire on that, but I'm sure that those scrutinies that we've got in chain now on housing, because housing is so all-encompassing to health, to poverty, to everything, they really will give us things, different topics, different areas to go on, I'm sure. And I'm not saying that we kick this one out indefinitely. I'm just saying that we need to prioritise what is the here and now need for our residents at the moment.
Yeah, I think I'm getting the feeling there's a consensus to leave this one on the table for the minute. My apologies, I just had a delivery man who couldn't read the note I'd left on the door. He was banging desperately. Councillor Matthews.
Sarah and Danny have sort of mentioned about poverty. I do think we have to be careful about the poverty word. A child's poverty in Africa is so different to a child's poverty on the Lincolnshire coast, but we can look at things around rural and social deprivation, which I think is what we need to be looking at, and the language we need to be using. Something else I wanted to say as well. Oh yes, just that, again, Fiona, you mentioned twice about it's too early to do COVID stuff. You know, I just think as a committee, we need to make up our mind whether they're going to be reactive or proactive. And actually, we know things are coming through now. We know there's been suicides in our community. We know there's people who won't be able to deal with their grief for a very long time. And we know that there's children in our community that are trying to, as a family, work on one iPhone to do all their lessons. We know our kids are going to be struggling when they go back to school, and they are going to fall behind. That has consequences for the future. We know about the job market will be different. There's lots of things. So actually, I do think we need to be maybe thinking about talking about some of these subjects now, and be a little bit more proactive in our approach to scrutiny, because we know it's coming.
Absolutely, but there's an emphasis on all of us to do that. I say we keep asking for topics and getting very little, if any, response. And it would be helpful if all councillors, not just overview councillors, but overview councillors in particular could actually sort of put some of these thoughts on paper, but they do need to be defined as to what a panel could look at, really, because you've just mentioned several different aspects there, Councillor Matthews, that of things that we know are happening in our communities, but we need to be focused in what elements of those we could look at with regard to the services that we're delivering, really. Otherwise, I think it could be a very large topic that grows and grows like Topsy if we're not careful. But please, you know, please do put thoughts in writing and let sort of Alison, Elaine, Edward and I have your thoughts for when we're looking at setting agendas and doing pre-meetings for this committee, because that would be helpful. Alison, did you want to make any comment about poverty and definitions?
Firstly, just on this particular topic that's been put forward, as overview committee, you don't have to accept it as a topic. So I think there's two decisions or two alternative decisions. One is just to not include it as a scrutiny topic. The second is to sort of push it back into towards the end of the year. So I just wanted to say that you don't have to accept it if you don't want to. In terms of definitions of poverty, there's tons of definitions of poverty, as you might expect. Some of them are more technical than others. Some of them are about percentages of income. Some are about, excuse me, about relative poverty and so on. But I know one that we often like using is Joseph Rowntree Foundation definition of poverty, which is poverty means not being able to heat your home, pay your rent or buy the essentials for your children. It means waking up every day facing insecurity, uncertainty and impossible decisions about money. It means facing marginalisation and even discrimination because of your financial circumstances. The constant stress it causes can lead to problems that deprive people of the chance to play a full part in society. You'll probably know that I've not learnt that off by heart. I've just looked it up on Google, but that is quite often one that we use, you know, when we're talking about this at work in terms of how we need to look at interventions to help people. And that definition feels a little bit more understandable in terms of what we mean by poverty. So as I say, there are a number of different definitions, but that is one that we often sort of refer to get clear in our minds how we can try to start to help people.
Okay, thank you. Could you email that out to everybody, Alison? That I think would be helpful.
Yeah.
To be able to read. Right, I'm in your hands. So I think there's two options. You either throw this out completely or you put it backwards. So would somebody like to make one of the two proposals? Nobody's saying anything. Do you wish to throw this out completely or do you just want to push it back in the programme? Councillor Harrison. You're muted, Sandra.
Thank you. I would suggest putting it back for now until we've done the housing one, because that may well steer us in specific directions we want to go in when we look at if and when we look at the poverty one.
Okay, that's been proposed. Is that one seconded? Yeah, that's seconded by Councillor Matthews. Councillor Devray, you were next, and then Councillor Matthews.
Thank you. I was just going to second the proposal. As I saw Sandra had got in first, so I was happy to second that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Matthews?
Same for me as well, Chair.
Okay, so it's proposed that we just put it back for the time being. Everybody happy with that? Yeah, anybody against that? Right, okay, but we will send out the definition because I think that's quite an interesting thing to look at anyway. Item 9 then is discussion around topics for inclusion in the annual scrutiny programme. Well, I think we've had 1 or 2 suggestions. I think Councillor Mossop said he was going to pick 2 or 3 up from the forward plan later in the agenda. And Councillor Matthews, you've made some suggestions that hopefully I think we could make some topics from. I think you're right, we do need to be proactive, and we do need to start looking at some of these things, and quite happy to take any suggestions anybody wants to make. So Councillor Matthews, would you've indicated.
Just that I put that we could do a general overview of maybe the rural social health and economic deprivation post-COVID, and then probably later on pick things out that are maybe stronger, that we need to work harder on. But there is going to be an overlay on all those issues post-COVID.
Okay, Alison, do you think there's enough there that we could make a topic from?
I think we could probably make about 10 from that. I think Councillor Matthews, you're saying an overview makes it sound very simple. I know what you mean. I think there's already some work being done on looking at a response to COVID, so sort of how we will respond as we start to come out of it. So there's already a piece of work. Actually, a piece of work started on that last time we thought we were coming out of it, and it kind of got shelved as we went back into it. But that piece of work's been reinstigated now. So I'm sure I can probably draw something out from that piece of work and email it round, and you can have a look at that. That's fine.
And I think there will probably be some good things that come out of it, how the NHS is working in rural communities. So that could be things that could be built on as well, how they've done like the hubs and things. But I think it would just be good just to have a look at across the board, and then just sort of highlight all the things, because as councillors, we're all picking up on these things anyway. And just to do a piece of work around that, and then take whatever comes from that forward.
So what we could do as a suggestion is set up a working group to actually have a discussion and devise a potential scope.
That'd be a good idea.
That sounds a sensible way forward, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, you'll action that, will you please, Alison?
Will do.
Thank you. Councillor Parkin. You're muted, Sarah.
Don't know what's wrong with me today. I think we're right to highlight poverty in this way, but I think there's a bit of a risk that we actually may miss out on the fact that some people who are not living in poverty and wouldn't define themselves as being in poverty have been exposed to a mental health crisis that they wouldn't normally have been exposed to, and pressures that way. I think we also need to be aware that in terms of moving forward, an awful lot of the problems that we have in terms of COVID, in terms of high mortality rates that Jill mentioned earlier, has been because we have never really got to grips with what public health means and its preventative and its proactive meaning of it, in terms of obesity, in terms of smoking, in terms of all of those things. And I think fundamentally, if we're not careful, we tend to look at the social aspect of poverty, which is the right thing to do, but then fail to recognise that the best way to get people out of poverty is through really good, active training, education and economic development. And I'm not just talking for children, I'm talking for adults as well. And so I think, yes, to a working group, but I almost think, does that need to be a much wider brainstorming type activity rather than, yes, we absolutely do need to look at poverty as part of that. But I think there's, I think there's so many factors that are impacting people at the moment, that it can't just be tied in with that one word, with that one definition, I don't think. Does that make sense?
Can I come back on that, Fiona?
Yeah.
I'm just looking, I mean, what I put is looking at the rural, the social, health and economic deprivation post-COVID, which I hope sort of captured most of the things you mentioned there, Sarah.
Yeah. I think
not just about poverty, it is about the wider.
I think we need to go broad and then narrow it down, Helen.
That's exactly what I
absolutely.
think.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point of the working group. They can look at the broad and hopefully narrow it down.
Yes.
Okay. Again, I think we've got a way forward, Alison. If you could set a working group on that up, that would be good, please. Can we take a 2-minute, because we've still got 4 items left to go. Can we have a 2-minute comfort break just to refresh coffee cups and shut the front door that I've left open inadvertently?
Fiona, I'll let you know now that I do have a meeting at 1 to go to. So am I about 10 to may have to slip off.
I'm hoping half an hour will finish it, but can we have 2 minutes and we'll reconvene at about 8 minutes past? Please, thank you. Hi, is everybody back?
Yep.
Good. That's 2 of us.
Dan's back.
I left a note on the front.
Oh, yeah.
Please leave parcel on doorstep as in a Zoom meeting. And the wretched delivery man couldn't read. He was stood at the window waving madly at me. Oh dear. There you go. Right, we're doing well.
I'm
Jill?
here, but my video isn't working.
Can you not put it
No,
on?
it says you cannot start your video because the host has disabled it. Ah, right. Can do now.
Right. So who are we short? Sandra. Sandra, are you doing yours? Lovely.
Oh, Alison's here now.
Yeah. Don't turn yours off, Alison. Don't worry. Sandra and Sarah, we're missing.
I'm here, Chairman, but I can't seem to get my picture up. Oh, start my video. Do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Wonderful.
Sorry about that. My mic and camera were disabled as well. I could hear you well, and I was going, where have I gone?
That's fine. Right. We're all back and finished. So we're now on item 10, which is update from the overview standing reference group, that you've got a report at page 131, which we met to decide what we wanted to look at on the hub, Horncastle hub. And you've got a list there of the things that it was felt were the lines of inquiry we wanted to make. And we've got a meeting next week. I think it's next week, isn't it? I haven't got my diary in front of me, but we have got at least one, if not two meetings set up for the standing reference group for the Horncastle hub. So
yeah, Monday.
Monday.
Yeah.
This coming Monday. Anybody got any questions or comments on that? It's really just a progress report to show you how we're getting on with it. No comments or questions? If there aren't any comments or questions, we'll go on then to the overview and scrutiny recommendation tracker, and there were some updates that Elaine sent out yesterday. Those, so we'll try and take those at the appropriate points. So the first one is commercial waste scrutiny panel. It's on page 133 or number 1, depending on which way you're looking at it. Does anybody have anything on that? Again, I mean, I think the commercial waste we keep getting updates and updates. It's another topic that we can ask Councillor Foster if he comes to the next meeting, exactly where things are at and what the progress on that is.
Can I declare an interest that my son on page, whatever it is, I can't see the page number, works in economic development, please?
Right, I don't think we're there yet, are we?
Yeah, it's the first of the commercial waste scrutiny thing. It recommends that the economic development team undertake the work. Well, given that there aren't many of them, they think they're doing grants and all these other things. I think that was a bit of a long shot.
Yeah. Okay, so Elaine, you'll add that to the questions for Councillor Foster. And then over the page 2, on page 2, relationship with housing associations. Anything on that anybody wanted to raise? Page 3, page 4, well, markets again. I think some of those issues we've already highlighted, haven't we, that we'd like Councillor Foster to tell us what he's doing with markets. Page 5. And then on page 6, right at the bottom, the conservation area scrutiny panel. There were some updates that Elaine sent out yesterday. Elaine, was it?
It was last Thursday, the 23rd.
Yeah. Yeah, last Thursday there were some updates that Emily Wales sent out, I think, on conservation area. So page 6, page 7, and it's one of the updates fits into the bottom of just above number 11. So you've got an update there. And then page 8. And then page 9, again, the Rough Sleeping Initiative. There were some updates that Elaine sent out last Thursday. So does anybody have anything on page 8 or page 9? Page 10. Or page 11. Or page 12. Page 13. And that's it on the recommendation tracker. So we're now on overview and, sorry, the exec board council forward plan.
Yeah, Fiona, sorry, can I just raise something about the economic and tourism recommendations haven't been put on the tracker yet, and we've now, what was that, October council, November council? It's a good couple of council meetings ago since that paper went. So it is just a follow up to see where we are with those, because I did expect to see them on the tracker this time, and obviously they're not there.
Yeah, no, my apologies, I'd forgotten about that one.
If I could just come in there, Chairman, I did ask Rebecca James, Scrutiny Officer. She has got them on her radar. They just haven't been to the portfolio holder meeting yet. There was one arranged and it was subsequently cancelled. So that's why.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
thank you, Elaine.
No, but thank you for the prompt, Councillor Parkin, because I had forgotten that one. So Elaine obviously hasn't. So we'll continue to chase that up for the next meeting. Anything else on the recommendation tracker? If not, Councillor Mossop, the forward plan. I know you said you've got issues you wanted to raise.
Yeah, just on the first page, actually, thank you. The Joint Emergency Response and Business Continuity Plan. I was just curious to know what that entails, whether it's going to be checked, whether there's any changes. It's probably quite pertinent in terms of when we have emergencies, as to all the councillors really should know what is happening. So I think it might be something for joint members, reserve members day. And also London Road Pavilion. I just was surprised to see that and why that was on the forward plan. Is there any decision or scrutiny that might be needed there in terms of consultation? It is just mentions email and meetings for consultation, so I'm not sure what that involves. And then on the final but one page, the Humber Flood Risk Management Strategy, Humber 2100 and selection of scenarios. Again, it's such an important issue about, especially those that represent coastal areas, as to where we are at with these strategies, which cover the whole of the Lincolnshire coast, of course. What is happening with them? You know, when we see marram grass being planted on the foreshore at Sandylands, is it being effective? is the beach enhancements scheme continuing, and is it effective? So on and so forth, both north and south of those particular risk areas. So I just feel it's something that currently my knowledge is not great as a councillor in terms of that, and it's something that should be probably widened, and something that perhaps we can either make a topic of scrutiny or something for Reserve Members Day to encourage a few more members to attend.
Right, Councillor Harrison, I noted you want to speak. Can we just take these that Councillor Mossop's mentioned first, and then I'll come back to you. So, Joint Emergency Response and Business Continuity Plan. Do we think that's one for Reserve Members Day? Alison, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, what's happened is we used to have a separate emergency response plan and a business continuity plan. So we've brought them together in a single document because there was some overlap. And we've produced one for ourselves and Boston. So that goes to Executive Board. In the past, what we've done is I think it's mainly been biannual training with staff and members around the emergency response. And we've done that through Reserve Members Day. So no doubt there'll be plans to do that again. So that will be coming up.
Tick that one off.
Yeah, so...
Get your second one, Councillor Mossop.
London Road Pavilion.
London Road Pavilion, just matters for decision, but I don't really know what that is. Maybe local members can help me out with that one. What's the plan happening? What's happening there? We're selling it off? Are we commercialising it? What are we doing?
No, that was to do with a request by the hockey club to look at a pitch there that could be used.
Or weather pitch?
No, it's in my ward, and it was for all sports up there. And it's about who's paying for it, while we're going ahead. I was told that the quotes were coming in November. I've heard nothing more.
Okay, if I can just continue. So what we're looking at there is an AstroTurf pitch.
Yeah.
So it actually gets reported, I think, to the next Executive Board. But also we've had lots of conversations with the Football Foundation, who are really keen to have a 3G pitch somewhere in East Lindsey. It's one of their priority areas. So there's some discussion about kind of how we link what might happen at London Road with a 3G pitch elsewhere, and potentially more than one 3G pitch, which would be primarily for football elsewhere in East Lindsey. So it's ended up being a bit of a package potentially of discussion, but the vast majority of it would be externally funded.
Okay, that's all right.
So, and the last one, I think, was the Humber.
It's the flood risk management, yeah.
Fred, I don't know anything about that at all, Councillor Mossop, so we'll get somebody else to do an update on that one.
Okay, and can you check then, Alison or Elaine, that or even Anne, because Anne's still here, that the Joint Emergency Response and Business Continuity Plan, that there are plans to do a Reserve Members Day or an update for members on that. Sandra, Councillor Harrison.
Mine's about the Humber risk management one. Is that okay to comment? Right.
Yeah.
That actually covers up as far as Northern Mablethorpe, if I remember correctly. We usually have a representative on it, and I believe it was Councillor Fry used to go when he did planning. And actually, they've got a meeting coming up in the near future because I was notified of it. But it is interesting. Sometimes I get the newsletters. They are very, very informative and interesting. I can send Councillor Mossop the details of the meeting, if that's appropriate, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you.
Sandra. Yeah, I mean, I think I do get the information from there directly, but I think it's a wider issue in terms of the rest of us knowing what it's all about.
And perhaps
fine.
we can check, can we, who the representative is? on that?
Fiona, it's Councillor
Yeah.
Ashton.
Oh, right.
Sits on that board.
Okay, thank you. So perhaps it would be good to ask him for an update or the minutes or something would be good.
Yeah, I believe the lead officer on it is Tim Leader.
Right. Okay, thank you. We'll see what we can do about getting more information on that. Councillor McNally.
Thank you. No, just briefly been said, so that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So has that dealt with all yours, Councillor Mossop?
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's handy to just see what's going on that forward plan and pick them out and move them to either reserve members day or potentially get a bit more information and decide whether we want to scrutinise anything from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the purpose of having it there, really, which is good. Councillor Makinson Saunders.
I was going to ask why a gypsy site in Louth had gone off the list, and if somebody would like to get back to me about it. I've been asked by some members of the public, and it's been conflicting information. So if I could have an update on that, please.
Okay, can somebody take that one up? Anybody else have anything else on the forward plan? No.
No.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much then. We're now then on the date of the next meeting. The only other thing I had to remind you about is that we have rearranged the discussion on responsibilities in line with the Constitution that we were going to have. That was cancelled before Christmas. We have rearranged that for Friday, the 12th of February at 10 a.m. So please, I hope as many of you as possible will be able to attend that. It will be a bit of an update for new members on responsibilities of overview and scrutiny, and then a look in line with the Constitution. And some of the issues we've talked about this morning, I'm sure will form discussion and debate at that as well. And Councillor McNally, I know you've said you want to speak, but as our super sub, you'll be very welcome to attend that if you're able. Did you want to speak as well?
Yeah. I didn't know where to bring it up, but I watched the last month's meeting of overview on YouTube, and actually I found it really interesting with the presentation about the housing strategy and stuff. So I think it's worthwhile if there is another sort of presentation on any of these things. It'd be worthwhile if the chairman or someone could email all members of the council. So it's a bit like a reserved members day, but you can watch it when you want to.
Yes.
But it was really, really worthwhile watching.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was true as well about Lewis Duckett's PSPS presentation. I mean, that was a really good presentation, and if we didn't, we should have suggested that was emailed to all members of the council as well. But I think your point's well made, and perhaps at future meetings, if people feel that there are presentations that would be worth sending round to everybody, you could highlight which ones you felt. Right, anybody got anything else? I know we don't have any other business, but if not, then the next meeting is the 9th of March. The year is marching on already. Thank you very much for your attendance.